It's just a great romantic entertainment. And it's funny. That's it. But I mean, it's full of romance and nice, complicated romance, but it's also about sort of higher issues like knowing yourself and not lying to yourself for all kinds of wrong reasons, and living the life you really want to live, and set in Italy, beautiful to look at, and all those things added up to make something. I'd read Forster's Passage to India, and then I liked it so much, I just read all his other novels. I particularly liked Room with a View, and I wanted to go back and work in Italy. It was really one of the reasons that I so much liked that story, because it was set in Florence, which Florence was not a city I knew very much about. I'd never ever spent much time in Florence. And Forster's a beautiful observer of people, and particularly the English. And he writes with a great deal of humor, but also a great deal of compassion and humanity. And he has sort of moral strength there to what he writes and to his opinions on life and how we live life and all our various ways, good and bad. At the same time, we were working on a contemporary story that Ruth Jalvala and I had sort of kind of cooked up called Three Continents. And she'd written a screenplay, but I was thinking, I just don't want to do another period film. I'd really like to do a modern story. So that was what Three Continents was. But meanwhile, because I'd already spoken to Ismail and said that it would be fun to do A Room with a View, he optioned the book. But then I got all excited about Three Continents and was trying to get him to commit to that. And he said, no, we've optioned this book and let's do it now. So, I gave in and was glad to get to go to Italy. We started out in California trying to raise the money, and we went to one sort of mini studio. It was actually Sam Goldwyn's, and he wanted us to change the whole story, and he said no one's interested in old people. He didn't think that there should be a character like Charlotte Bartlett or old Mr. Emerson, and we should get rid of them, and it should all be about young people, and could we not make Lucy into an American girl, and all this stuff. And that's the sort of thing we got. Ismail was a very, very convincing, very, very skilled person at raising money and making people believe in what he believed in. And I don't know, there was nobody else like him.
I came to Room with You because I had done a television film called The Good Soldier. Jim actually wrote a very nice review of the film that he'd seen in Sight and Sound. And then, just before they were looking to start Room with You, I had had a very successful Alan Bennett film come out called A Private Function. And Jim had seen that, and he liked that as well. So now he'd seen two of my films that he'd enjoyed. And Jim invited me out to dinner, not Ismail, just Jim. Jim was sort of apologetic about it and slightly embarrassed, and he said, now, Tony, you got to know, there's only the most exciting thing that'll happen will be a tea party in a Merchant Ivory movie. And I said, oh, okay, fine. I said, as long as it's just one tea party, that's all right.
That's lavish. What a recommendation for a place.
Indeed, Miss Allen, it is a recommendation. Between the squalor of London and the squalor of Prato, there is a great gulf fixed.
In the way that Ruth had done the script, you meet the characters in a very different way than you do in the book. I'd almost given up on the book because you meet so many different characters near the beginning, you can't latch on to them. But somehow, with the path that Ruth took, you actually meet them in a very orderly fashion and can go and understand how they all interact. And that's very, very clever, I think.
This is not at all what we were led to expect.
I thought we were going to see the Arno.
Helena made one film already, and she came to see me, and she sat there on the sofa with her legs stuck straight out and some big black shoes. Even then, in those days, they had big black boots for girls, pretty girls, and she stuck her legs out like that and frowned, and she has these quite thick, dark eyebrows, and she just sat there and frowned and kind of daring us to show our stupidity or something like that. That's really what I felt. But she was so beautiful and so charming when she eventually loosened up and laughed, and I just liked her immediately. I thought she'd be perfect, and she was. She was not a pianist. I mean, she never took piano lessons, but she had a facility which was very, very, very rare, sort of physical facility in being able to play that music. And our composer, Richard Robbins, said that she had a natural talent that would, I mean, if she'd ever chosen to be a pianist, I mean, she would have been very, very good, he thought. The first choice to play Cecil was Rupert Everett, and he came to see me here in New York, and he didn't want to play Cecil. He wanted to play George Emerson, and I didn't think that was right, that it wasn't my idea of what George Emerson should be. And so I then met Daniel Day-Lewis after that. I was delighted with what he did and the way he did it. It was just wonderful to watch.
Italy and London are the places where I feel I truly belong. I am something of an inglese Italianato, e un diavolo incarnato. You know the proverb?
He just was doing something wonderful on his own. And sometimes you see that as you go along and you're making a movie. There are certain performers, you watch them ever more carefully as the days go by. You know they're creating something very, very good and interesting, and I felt that about Dan. Julian Sands I saw in The Killing Fields, and I liked him very much. I thought he was really interesting looking. Right away, I thought he'd be good for George. As for Rupert, I'd never heard of Rupert. We had a wonderful casting director named Celestia Fox, and she knew all these young men. I mean, they came from her, as did Hugh Grant and when we did Morris. In fact, Hugh Grant came for an audition for A Room with a View. He says that after 30 seconds he was kicked out, and it's true. I mean, he just wasn't right, as far as I was concerned, to play either Cecil, but he might have been a very good Cecil, and certainly not George. He was too sophisticated and such as a different type. I've always thought that in the relationship between actors and director, that directors are wide in all the things they have to bring to a film. They're wide, but rather shallow. And actors are very contained, but deep. And that's how I feel. And they only have one thing to think about, and that's that character. And they work that out in all kinds of ways, which I have no idea how they do it. What I believe in is letting them show me what they have thought up. What do they want to do? How do they want to play that part or that scene? What do they want to do? I let them show me. And usually it's very, very good. And I like it. Occasionally, I want to change it. Or sometimes they go off on some sort of wrong way, and then I have to bring them back. But on the whole, I let them, they're artists. I mean, artists have to be allowed to show you what they've made.
Jim has an appreciation of all art forms, and so that's much easier to relate to someone like that than someone who is either fashion orientated or is working from other people's earlier films, taking ideas and putting a sort of amalgam together. With Jim that it's actually based on his sensibilities of all art.
What I know about period costume, I've entirely learned from Jenny and John and one or two other costume designers. That's what I know about it, is from making all those films with them. And now I think I've learned a lot. I know quite a lot about costume now, but I'm totally their student.
Often what we do when someone is cast in a role is we dress them up in clothes approximate to the period. If we have things that we think, oh, that's perfect, we might add that in. But you get, by talking to people, their ideas on what they think of colour and what they think suits them, so that since you're all standing around a mirror and they're looking at themselves, they can tell you very clearly what they like and what they don't like. There aren't really any new designs as such. because they're built up on the person. So you are designing, but you're designing with all these specifics in mind and no sketches. I know that some Hollywood films still want the sketches and all that stuff, but it's often done by a sketch artist who has absolutely no idea of what the character should be. And it's a very odd idea to me because it's completely separate from what you're trying to do with a person, because we definitely work with the actor so that you understand what they need and you try and fulfill that in terms of their relationship to other people. The general look was created by Ismail giving us some colour brochures of what Florence looked like, because I'd never been there. And then James came up with some photos of the period, which of course are all black and white. And so the idea of the colours came a bit from that combination. The Italians, who are strong and forceful, were in the black and white spectrum. The English, who are a bit wishy-washy and touristy, were in the beiges and whatever. And so any points in the film that need pointing up, one used colour to a certain extent to do that. So, for instance, when everyone's having a good time in the lake bathing and we see the three members of the family coming towards them, I thought of them as being like avenging angels.
This way, Mrs. Honeychurch. Follow me.
So they were very white, very pure.
Most of the rehearsals were done on the day. I mean, you'd turn up in time. You'd have to winkle Jim away from the breakfast queue because he loved his full fry-up in the morning. And then you'd rehearse the scene. And then the actors would go off and be made. And I would discuss with Jim what I thought the shots we should do. And then Jim always had a little room somewhere that he'd go off to while he got everything ready. And that was it. It was a very simple process. There weren't storyboards. There was no video playback, which was great because it meant there's the camera, Jim's right next to me, there's the scene. You'd go, do you like this shot? Yeah, great, okay, fine, turn over. Very simple, direct process. If he didn't like something, he would speak out quite forcibly, but there was not a sense of, he wasn't one of those directors that used to go around with a viewfinder and say, all right, put a mark down there. Boom. None of that happened at all. So it left you free to suggest lots of things.
I always felt his composition and his framing was just perfect, and his sense of color is very, very good. And then his technical skills were tremendous. And, he was quite young then, but he had already absorbed a tremendous amount of technical information and know-how.
We all stayed in a pensione called the Pensione Quisisana e Pontivecchio, right in the heart of Florence, which sadly is now no more because it was blown up by the Red Brigade some years later. But this was a very old pensione, and it had some not very good rooms, which were at the back, and one or two lovely rooms at the front. And Jim said, oh, you've got to stay in this room in the front, it's just wonderful. So he personally made sure that for some of the time I was in this lovely room at the front of the place. Unfortunately, the traffic noise was dreadful. And I said to the production, I said, look, can I move down at the back because I can't get any sleep and I really need to sleep because I've got to work. So, but things like that. I mean, most directors don't care where you're sleeping as long as you turn up on time. But that you had the experience of being in this lovely room with this sort of 200-year-old antiques and things was important to him, and that was important that you got the feel for being in Florence as they would have had.
Buongiorno, buongiorno, Ferdinando.
They found a guy called Peter Marangoni, who was very well connected in Florentine society. And he was supposedly the location manager. But he only dealt with the sort of grandiose parts of it. So he'd get you permission from the mayor to film in the Piazza Signoria. But if you'd say, well, where do we park the generator, Gov? Oh, I don't really know about that sort of thing. Because he wasn't really a proper production manager. He was a sort of fading aristocrat, really. Very nice man, very, very nice man. And the other problem with Florence, of course, is it's got a ring road which is full of traffic. I mean, Italians driving like lunatics all day long. And if you remember the scene after the whole murder in the Piazza Signoria, there's a low-angle shot of Julian Sands and Helena, who come and look into the River Arno. And actually, if you'd come up 2 inches on the camera, you'd have seen this traffic roaring through. It just all worked. Very serendipitous, a lot of it. I mean, one of the shots I love, which is completely serendipitous, during the fight in the Piazza Signoria, the man who's bleeding from his mouth, I said, Jim, let's do this high speed. So we got the old wild camera out. It's running at 120 frames a second. And there's this brilliant moment, entirely accidental. There's the guy's head's coming back and the blood's pouring down, and I'm rushing in with the camera at 120 frames a second. And some extra's hand goes like this and just blocks it from me at exactly the right moment. I think, in fact, he was stopping me clocking the actor with the camera, bashing him. You could never have planned that. It just happened by chance. It was great.
The Pensione, which is described in the book, you would look out from the windows of the Pensione across the Arno and towards this wonderful church called San Miniato. And now it wasn't possible to do that anymore because they had built a sort of motor speedway on the other side of the Arno. So if you looked out to get that same view, you couldn't do it. So we had to flip the view and look towards, away from the river and San Miniato, but towards the cathedral and Giotto's Tower and all of that. And we did that by shooting on the other side of the river, looking back into the center of the town. But it's not at all what Forster described because there was no way to shoot what he described. So we had to build a set.
We built a frontage and 2 side walls and a black over the back, just for that one shot.
There was no sacred lake on the Pym estate, but there was a sort of hollow that we thought, well, we'll fill with water.
They put a big plastic sheet down, and over, I think, a period of a week or a couple of weeks, actually took a while, it had to be filled up, and it had to be heated, and it had to be lit.
I mean, I was determined that with them, they would just be naked. And what is seen is seen. What is not seen is not seen. And whatever they did, so be it.
That was very much shot like a documentary. Jim stood next to me and kind of said action. I sort of feel that it was kind of semi-directed by Julian Sands, actually. He was the driving force behind all the more outrageous activities. And the actors just did it, just ran around, and we shot, and we shot, and we shot.
Ismail was one of the world's greatest promoters of his own films. He knew everybody. He knew all the people to go to and all the magazines and papers. He was a genius at promotion. So once my job was kind of over shooting it, because I was in the editing room, but then he was out there, laying out the paths, how that film would go. You know, I have a very close relationship with my editors. I always have had. I go every day to the editing room. We work, and finally we arrive at a rough cut, and then Ruth sees the rough cut. And it's sort of unique. I mean, certainly in this country for the writer to come into the editing room at that stage of a film. I mean, you wouldn't get anywhere near an editing room if you were working in Hollywood, if you're the writer. But she had tremendous ideas, always. And I consider that in some cases she saved the film early on in our careers. We've made films which were just a mess sometimes. And she knew exactly somehow what to do. Because after all, she was a very, very good fiction writer. And to her, the most important thing was tell the story. Tell the story clearly and as swiftly as possible and get to the end. That was really what she wanted to do. Like the old moguls of Hollywood. I mean, that's what they always wanted to do. Tell the story quickly, get to the end, and have people entertained. And that was also her philosophy. So, and sometimes as a director, you don't think like that. You know, you think, oh, I really like this, and this is such a nice angle, and I like that little bit of it, and so on and so on. And, well, a lot of it goes out the window.
I thought it would be a successful film, and I thought particularly it would do well in America. The English still kind of consider it a bit of like a heritage movie. But this is from the critics and the people in the industry. The audience loved it. There's that thing where everything all comes together at the right time. You can't really analyze it. Everybody is sort of enthused by the project, or the actors all really work together. You can't actually analyze as to why that is. If you could, there'd be more better films out there.
You know, if you make a film for $3.5 million, which then grosses $70 million or whatever it was, then people think you have some special secrets. So we then were offered all kinds of projects, and we were able to do all kinds of things that we wanted to do for a long time with the studios, and the studios were so generous. So it was thought that we had some special ability to take a small amount of money and turn it into a giant amount of money. And that's why our lives did change, and that's why we've made so many movies.